6 million murdered, temples burned, homeland conquered, scattered across every continent. By all logic, they should have vanished centuries ago, like every other ancient people. Instead, they shaped half the world's religions and transformed modern science, arts, and ethics. What is their secret? The answer lies in a 4,000-year-old promise that refuses to die. This is the story of the Jews. The Patriarchal Era, spanning roughly from 2000 to 1300 BCE, marks the foundational period of Jewish history, beginning with Abraham's revolutionary break from polytheism and ending with the Israelites' descent into Egypt. This era established the core concepts that would shape Judaism: monotheism, covenant, and the promise of a homeland. But what made this beginning so different from every other ancient religion would only become clear thousands of years later. The story begins in Ur of the Chaldeans, a sophisticated Mesopotamian city where Abraham, originally called Abram, lived among people who worshipped multiple gods. According to Jewish tradition, Abraham recognized the existence of one supreme God through observation and reasoning, rejecting the idolatry of his father's house. This intellectual and spiritual breakthrough would transform human understanding of the divine. But first, it nearly cost him everything. Around 1800 BCE, Abraham received a divine call to leave his homeland and journey to Canaan, with God promising to make him the father of a great nation. The covenant between God and Abraham became the cornerstone of Jewish theology. This wasn't merely a transactional agreement, but a binding relationship marked by three key promises: numerous descendants, blessing for all nations through his lineage, and the land of Canaan as an eternal inheritance. The sign of this covenant was circumcision, establishing a physical mark of spiritual commitment that continues in Jewish practice today. Abraham's faith faced its ultimate test in the binding of Isaac, where his willingness to sacrifice his son demonstrated absolute trust in God, while ultimately affirming the sanctity of human life when God provided a ram as substitute. This moment would echo through history whenever Jews faced impossible choices. The patriarchal narrative continued through Isaac and Jacob, each adding layers to the developing relationship between God and the chosen family. Isaac, though less prominent in the narrative, maintained the covenant and passed the blessing to Jacob rather than Esau, showing that spiritual inheritance transcended birthright. Jacob's story was one of transformation, from a clever deceiver to Israel, one who struggles with God. His midnight wrestling match with a divine being symbolized the Jewish approach to faith, engaging with God through struggle, question, and ultimate submission. Here was born a radical idea that humans could argue with God and survive. Jacob's 12 sons became the progenitors of the 12 tribes of Israel. The Exodus and Wilderness Era. The Exodus and Wilderness Era, spanning approximately from 1300 to 1200 BCE, represents the defining moment in Jewish consciousness, the transformation from an enslaved people to a covenant nation. This period, centered on the towering figure of Moses, established the fundamental structures of Jewish law, worship, and national identity that would endure through all subsequent history. But it began with a cry of desperation that seemed to go unanswered for generations. The era began with a dramatic reversal of fortune. The Israelites, who had come to Egypt as honored guests under Joseph's protection, found themselves enslaved by a pharaoh who knew not Joseph. The biblical narrative describes centuries of bondage, during which the Israelites multiplied despite oppression, maintaining their distinct identity even while adopting aspects of Egyptian culture. This experience of slavery would become central to Jewish memory, creating an ethical imperative to remember the stranger and oppressed that permeates Jewish law and thought. Yet in their darkest hour, something extraordinary was about to happen. Moses emerged as the reluctant prophet liberator, his life journey embodying the complexities of Jewish identity. Raised in Pharaoh's palace, yet aware of his Hebrew origins, Moses fled Egypt after killing a taskmaster, spending years in Midianite wilderness before encountering God at the burning bush. This theophany introduced a new divine name, Yahweh, I am who I am, suggesting a God of being itself, dynamic and present. Moses' initial resistance to his calling reflected a pattern of prophetic reluctance that would characterize later Jewish prophecy, but when he finally accepted, the world would never be the same. The 10 plagues and the Exodus itself demonstrated God's power over the Egyptian deities and natural order. Each plague systematically challenged aspects of Egyptian religion and society, culminating in the death of the firstborn and the institution of Passover. This festival, with its rituals of remembrance and retelling, established the Jewish pattern of liturgical memory, making past events present realities for each generation. The crossing of the Red Sea became the paradigmatic moment of divine salvation, referenced throughout subsequent Jewish literature as the model of God's redemptive power. But freedom, they would learn, was only the beginning. The revelation at Mount Sinai marked the crucial transformation from liberation to covenant. Here, in an event unique in human history, the entire people experienced divine revelation, receiving the 10 Commandments and accepting the Torah. This democratic theophany, where everyone from Moses to the lowliest servant witnessed God's presence, established the principle that all Jews stood at Sinai, binding every generation to the covenant. The giving of the Torah created Judaism as a religion of law, but law understood as divine instruction for living, rather than mere legal code. This moment would define Jewish identity forever. They were now a people of the book. The 40 years of wilderness wandering served as a formative period for the nascent nation. The golden calf incident revealed the people's continued attraction to tangible divine representations, leading to a reaffirmation of imageless worship that would distinguish Jewish practice. The construction of the tabernacle provided a portable sacred space, establishing patterns of worship and priesthood while maintaining the tension between divine transcendence and immanence. The various rebellions and complaints during this period demonstrated the difficulty of transforming slaves into a free people, requiring a generation to die before entering the promised land. Yet each crisis became a teaching moment, each rebellion a chance for growth. The wilderness era also saw the development of Jewish law beyond the initial revelation. The Torah describes numerous additional commandments given during this period, covering everything from ritual purity to civil law, creating a comprehensive system for ordering society according to divine will. Moses' final speeches in Deuteronomy provided a theological interpretation of the journey, emphasizing the conditional nature of the covenant, blessing for obedience, curse for rebellion. That would shape prophetic preaching for centuries. As they stood at the Jordan River's edge, the Israelites were no longer slaves, but a covenant people, ready to claim their promise. But claiming it would require battles they couldn't yet imagine. The monarchical era, extending from approximately 1200 to 586 BCE, witnessed ancient Israel's transformation from a loose confederation of tribes to a unified kingdom. Its golden age and division, and ultimately, the destruction of the First Temple. This period established Jerusalem as the eternal center of Jewish worship, produced much of the Hebrew Bible's literature, and created tensions between prophetic ideals and political realities that would resonate throughout Jewish history. What began as a demand for a king like all other nations would end with the bitter lesson that being like other nations could lead to destruction. The era began with the period of the Judges, a turbulent time when there was no king in Israel. Everyone did what was right in their own eyes. The tribal confederation struggled against Philistine pressure and internal disunity, with charismatic leaders like Deborah, Gideon, and Samson arising to meet specific crises. This decentralized system reflected the ideal of divine kingship. God alone ruled Israel, but proved inadequate against organized enemies. The prophet Samuel, serving as the last judge, reluctantly anointed Saul as Israel's first king in response to popular demand, warning that human kingship would bring taxation, conscription, and tyranny alongside security. His warnings would prove prophetically accurate. Saul's tragic reign embodied the tensions inherent in Israelite monarchy. Initially successful in uniting the tribes and defeating enemies, Saul's mental deterioration and conflicts with Samuel over religious authority demonstrated the difficulty of balancing political and spiritual leadership. David's emergence as Saul's successor marked the monarchical high point. The shepherd-poet-warrior conquered Jerusalem, made it his capital, and brought the Ark of the Covenant there, brilliantly uniting political and religious centers. David's reign, despite personal failures including adultery and murder, established the Davidic covenant, God's promise of an eternal dynasty that would become central to messianic hope. Here was a king who could write psalms and wield swords, who sinned greatly, but repented genuinely. Solomon's reign represented both the zenith of Israelite power and the seeds of catastrophe. His building of the first temple fulfilled David's dream, creating a permanent home for divine presence and centralizing worship in Jerusalem. The temple's elaborate construction and dedication demonstrated Israel's wealth and cultural sophistication, while its design reflected both Israelite theology and ancient Near Eastern influences. Yet Solomon's heavy taxation, forced labor, and religious syncretism created resentments that would fracture the kingdom. His wisdom, celebrated in biblical literature, couldn't prevent the political mistakes that would divide the nation.
The very success that brought the Queen of Sheba to marvel would plant the seeds of destruction. The kingdom split in 922 BCE, with 10 northern tribes forming Israel and 2 southern tribes remaining as Judah. This division weakened both kingdoms and created competing religious centers, with Jeroboam establishing alternative shrines in the north to prevent pilgrimage to Jerusalem. The northern kingdom experienced chronic instability, with multiple dynasties and increasing adoption of Canaanite religious practices. Prophets like Elijah and Elisha fought to maintain exclusive worship of Yahweh, their miraculous acts and confrontations with royal power establishing the prophetic tradition of speaking truth to authority. The showdown on Mount Carmel between Elijah and the prophets of Baal became the archetypal battle between true and false religion. The prophetic movement reached new heights during this era, with figures like Isaiah, Jeremiah, Amos, and Hosea articulating a vision of ethical monotheism that transcended ritual observance. These prophets criticized social injustice, empty worship, and political alliances, calling for return to covenant faithfulness. Their writings, preserved in the Hebrew Bible, transformed temporary political crises into timeless spiritual teachings. The prophetic emphasis on justice, compassion, and internal transformation would profoundly influence not only Judaism, but world religious thought. They dared to tell kings they were wrong, to comfort the afflicted and afflict the comfortable. The era concluded with twin catastrophes. The northern kingdom fell to Assyria in 722 BCE. Its population dispersed and eventually lost to history as the 10 lost tribes. Judah survived another century before Babylonian forces destroyed Jerusalem and the temple in 586 BCE. This destruction marked the end of the First Temple period and began the exile that would transform Judaism forever. The monarchical era thus established patterns that would echo through Jewish history. The promise and peril of political power, the centrality of Jerusalem, the tension between prophet and king, and the devastating consequences of abandoning covenant faithfulness. The kingdom built with such hope lay in ruins, but from those ruins would arise something unprecedented in human history. The exile and return era. The exile and return era, spanning from 586 to 332 BCE, marked a fundamental transformation in Jewish religion and identity. The catastrophic loss of temple, land, and sovereignty forced a creative theological response that would enable Judaism's survival through subsequent dispersions. This period saw the development of new religious institutions, the compilation of sacred texts, and the emergence of Judaism as a portable faith, transcending geographical boundaries.
What seemed like the end of Jewish history became instead its most creative beginning. The Babylonian exile began with Jerusalem's destruction, as Nebuchadnezzar's forces demolished Solomon's temple, ended the Davidic monarchy, and deported Judah's leadership to Babylonia. The psychological and theological trauma was immense. How could God's chosen people suffer such defeat? By the rivers of Babylon they sat and wept, asking how they could sing the Lord's song in a foreign land. The exilic prophets provided answers that reshaped Jewish theology. Jeremiah, who witnessed the destruction, proclaimed it divine punishment for covenant violation, while promising future restoration. Ezekiel's visions in Babylonia assured the exiles of God's continued presence, even outside the land. His imagery of divine throne chariots suggesting a mobile deity not confined to Jerusalem. Here was born a radical idea: God could be worshipped anywhere. The exilic community developed innovations that would sustain Judaism forever. Without temple sacrifice, prayer and study became central religious acts. The synagogue emerged as a gathering place for worship and learning, a revolutionary institution requiring no priests or sacrifices. The Sabbath, previously one observance among many, became the primary marker of Jewish identity, creating sacred time when sacred space was lost. Dietary laws and circumcision gained new importance as boundary markers distinguishing Jews from surrounding peoples. These adaptations transformed Judaism from a sacrificial cult to a religion of practice and study. Necessity became the mother of spiritual invention. The period also saw crucial literary activity. The traumatic experience prompted collection and editing of earlier traditions, producing much of the Hebrew Bible's final form. The Deuteronomistic historians shaped Israel's history as a moral lesson about covenant faithfulness. Priests in exile compiled ritual and legal traditions into what became the Torah's priestly source. The wisdom literature, including Job and parts of Proverbs, grappled with questions of suffering and divine justice raised by exile experience. This literary productivity preserved Jewish memory and created the textual foundation for future Judaism. The Persian conquest of Babylonia in 539 BCE brought dramatic change. Cyrus the Great's policy of religious tolerance allowed exiled peoples to return home, earning him messianic praise in Isaiah as God's anointed one. Yet the return proved more complex than anticipated. Many Jews, established in Babylonian communities, chose to remain, creating the permanent diaspora that would characterize Jewish existence. Those who returned found a devastated land occupied by peoples who had moved in during the exile, including Samaritans who claimed Israelite heritage but were rejected by the returnees. The dream of restoration met the harsh reality of starting over. The restoration period faced enormous challenges. Under leaders like Zerubbabel, Ezra, and Nehemiah, the community rebuilt the temple, though the Second Temple lacked the first's grandeur, and according to tradition, several sacred elements, including the Ark of the Covenant. Old men who remembered the First Temple wept at the sight. Ezra's reforms emphasized Torah observance and ethnic purity, including forced dissolution of intermarriages, reflecting anxiety about maintaining distinct identity. Nehemiah rebuilt Jerusalem's walls despite opposition, providing physical security and symbolic renewal. These leaders established patterns of Jewish life centered on Torah study, temple worship, and communal discipline. They learned that walls could be rebuilt, but innocence could not be restored. The era's legacy was profound and paradoxical. The exile that threatened Jewish existence actually strengthened it by forcing adaptations that made Judaism survivable anywhere. The return that should have restored former glory instead created a more modest but sustainable religious community. The tension between diaspora and homeland, between textual study and temple worship, between universal ethics and particular identity, all emerged during this period. The exile and return era thus transformed Judaism from a national religion dependent on land and temple to a portable faith, capable of maintaining identity through text, practice, and community. They had learned the secret of survival. Home was not a place, but a way of being.
This lesson would prove invaluable in the centuries ahead.
The Second Temple Era. The Second Temple Era, extending from 332 BCE to 70 CE, was a period of extraordinary dynamism, conflict, and creativity in Jewish history. During these 4 centuries, Judaism encountered Hellenistic culture, achieved brief independence, fell under Roman rule, and developed diverse movements that would shape its future. This era produced new forms of Jewish thought, saw unprecedented cultural exchange, and ended with another catastrophic destruction that would again transform the faith. But first, it would witness battles for the very soul of Judaism itself. The period began with Alexander the Great's conquest in 332 BCE, introducing Jews to Hellenistic culture. This encounter created profound tensions between those embracing Greek philosophy, language, and customs, and traditionalists resisting foreign influence. The Ptolemaic rulers of Egypt, who initially controlled Judea, allowed considerable religious autonomy, during which time the Hebrew Bible was translated into Greek, the Septuagint, for Alexandria's large Jewish community. This translation made Jewish scripture accessible to the wider Mediterranean world and demonstrated Judaism's engagement with cosmopolitan culture. But with cultural exchange came cultural conflict. Seleucid rule from 198 BCE brought increasing pressure to Hellenize. The crisis peaked under Antiochus IV Epiphanes, who prohibited Jewish practices and desecrated the temple by sacrificing pigs and dedicating it to Zeus. This persecution sparked the Maccabean revolt in 167 BCE, led by the priestly Hasmonean family. Against overwhelming odds, the Jewish rebels achieved military victory and religious freedom, rededicating the temple in 164 BCE, an event commemorated in Hanukkah. The miracle of 1 day's oil lasting 8 became a symbol of Jewish survival against impossible odds. The Hasmoneans established an independent Jewish state, the last until modern Israel, though their combination of priesthood and kingship violated traditional separations and created internal conflicts. During this period, distinct Jewish movements emerged, each offering different visions of Jewish life. The Pharisees emphasized oral tradition alongside written Torah, developing interpretive methods that would enable Judaism's post-temple survival. Their belief in resurrection, angels, and divine providence appealed to common people. The Sadducees, associated with priestly aristocracy, accepted only written Torah and denied afterlife, maintaining temple-centered worship. The Essenes, possibly connected to the Dead Sea Scrolls community, withdrew from corrupt society to pursue ritual purity and apocalyptic preparation. These movements' debates shaped Jewish thought and practice, creating a dynamic intellectual environment crucial for Judaism's future adaptation. Roman involvement began in 63 BCE, when Pompey conquered Jerusalem, ending Hasmonean independence. The Romans initially ruled through client kings, most notably Herod the Great, 37–4 BCE, whose reign embodied the era's contradictions. Herod massively expanded the Second Temple, creating one of antiquity's architectural wonders that made Jerusalem a pilgrimage destination for Jews worldwide. Yet he also built pagan temples and executed perceived threats, including members of his own family. His Idumean origins and Roman allegiance made him suspect to Jewish subjects, despite his temple project. After Herod's death, increasing Roman direct rule through procurators created mounting tensions that would eventually explode. The 1st century CE witnessed growing messianic ferment and anti-Roman sentiment. Various figures claimed messianic status, promising divine intervention against oppression. The ministry of Jesus of Nazareth occurred within this context, his execution by Roman authorities reflecting official nervousness about potential rebellions. Jewish communities throughout the Roman Empire struggled to balance loyalty to ancestral traditions with citizenship requirements. Philo of Alexandria pioneered allegorical interpretation, harmonizing Jewish scripture with Greek philosophy. and arguing for Judaism's philosophical sophistication. The Jewish world had never been more diverse or more creative. The era climaxed with the Great Revolt, 66 to 70 CE, as accumulated grievances exploded into war against Rome. Initial Jewish victories couldn't overcome Roman military might. The siege of Jerusalem witnessed horrific suffering, internal Jewish factional fighting, and ultimately the temple's destruction on the 9th of Av in 70 CE. The same date as the first temple's destruction, this second destruction ended the sacrificial system permanently and dispersed the population. The fall of Masada in 73 CE, where Jewish rebels chose mass suicide over surrender, symbolized the revolt's tragic end. As the temple burned, the foundations of rabbinic Judaism were already being laid by those who understood that Judaism must once again reinvent itself to survive. The Second Temple era thus ended as dramatically as it began, but its diverse movements and intellectual ferment had prepared Judaism for its next transformation.
The Talmudic era. The Talmudic era, spanning from 70 to 600 CE, witnessed Judaism's remarkable transformation, from a temple-based religion to one centered on law, study, and communal practice. Following the Second Temple's destruction, Jewish leaders developed new institutions and compiled vast legal and interpretive traditions that would guide Jewish life for millennia. This period produced the Mishnah and Talmud, established the authority of rabbis, and created a portable religious system enabling survival without sovereignty. From the ashes of destruction arose a new form of Judaism that would prove indestructible. The immediate aftermath of the temple's destruction required radical adaptation. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, who, according to tradition, escaped besieged Jerusalem in a coffin, established a new center of learning at Yavna. His famous declaration that acts of loving kindness could replace sacrificial atonement exemplified the creative reinterpretation necessary for survival. When a student despaired at seeing the temple ruins, Ben Zakkai responded, "Do not grieve, for we have another means of atonement, equally effective, acts of loving kindness." The Yavna Academy began systematizing oral traditions, establishing the biblical canon, and creating liturgy to replace temple worship. Prayer services incorporated temple imagery and timing, maintaining continuity while accepting new realities. The Bar Kokhba Revolt, 132 to 136 CE, represented the final attempt to restore Jewish sovereignty and rebuild the temple. Initially successful, with Rabbi Akiva proclaiming Bar Kokhba as Messiah, the revolt ultimately failed catastrophically. Roman retaliation was severe. Jews were banned from Jerusalem, now renamed Aelia Capitolina. Judea became Syria Palestina, erasing Jewish connection to the land even in name, and Jewish practice was temporarily prohibited. The revolt's failure ended military messianism and confirmed that Judaism's future lay in spiritual and legal development, not political restoration. The martyrdom of Rabbi Akiva and other scholars during Roman persecution became paradigmatic. They died with the Shema on their lips, teaching that spiritual resistance could triumph over physical destruction. The compilation of the Mishnah around 200 CE by Rabbi Judah the Prince marked a crucial development. This systematic organization of Jewish law covered every aspect of life, from agriculture to ritual purity, civil law to holiday observance. Written in clear Hebrew, the Mishnah preserved traditions that might otherwise have been lost, and provided a common legal foundation for dispersed communities. Its 6 orders created a comprehensive blueprint for Jewish life, maintaining practices relevant to temple times alongside practical regulations for contemporary existence. The Mishnah's authority derived not from divine revelation, but from collective rabbinic wisdom, establishing the principle that human interpretation could shape divine law. Following the Mishnah, rabbinic academies in both Palestine and Babylonia engaged in extensive analysis and debate, producing the Gemara, commentary on the Mishnah. The Jerusalem Talmud, completed around 400 CE, under difficult conditions of Roman-Byzantine persecution, remained shorter and less influential. The Babylonian Talmud,
finished around 600 CE in the more tolerant Persian environment, became Judaism's central text after the Bible. These massive compilations included not only legal discussions, but also ethical teachings, biblical interpretation, historical memories, and folk wisdom. One fascinating statistic: the Babylonian Talmud contains over 2.5 million words, making it larger than the Encyclopedia Britannica. The Talmudic methodology revolutionized Jewish thought. Through intricate logical analysis, hypothetical scenarios, and minority opinions, preserved alongside majority rulings, the Talmud modeled a culture of intellectual debate and interpretation. The principle of "these and these are the words of the living God" acknowledged multiple valid interpretations within boundaries. The Talmud records arguments between schools of thought that lasted generations, teaching that truth emerges through dialogue, not dogma. Agadah, narrative and ethical teachings, complemented halacha, law, ensuring that legal study remained connected to moral and spiritual development. The Talmud's associative organization and multiple layers of meaning would influence Jewish learning styles permanently. The era also established rabbinic authority as the new leadership model. Unlike priests who inherited positions, rabbis earned authority through learning and character. The title meant teacher, emphasizing education over ritual function. Rabbis served as judges, teachers, and communal leaders, but most maintained regular occupations. Hillel was a woodcutter, Shammai a builder. This prevented the creation of a privileged clerical class. This democratization of religious leadership, where any male could theoretically become a rabbi through study, contrasted sharply with hereditary priesthood. The Talmudic era thus created Judaism's distinctive culture of learning.
The medieval era. The medieval era, spanning from 600 to 1500 CE, encompassed dramatically different Jewish experiences across the Islamic and Christian worlds. This period witnessed Jewish cultural flowering under Muslim rule, devastating persecutions in Christian Europe, remarkable intellectual achievements, and the development of mystical traditions. Despite facing expulsions, forced conversions, and massacres, medieval Jews produced enduring contributions to philosophy, poetry, law, and spirituality, while maintaining their distinct identity. The same era that produced Maimonides also produced martyrs. The same centuries that saw Jewish viziers saw Jewish victims. The rise of Islam in the 7th century initially improved Jewish circumstances. The Muslim conquest liberated Jews from Byzantine persecution, and Islamic law granted them protected status as people of the book. The Genocide period, 600 to 1000 CE, centered in Babylonia, saw the great academies of Sura and Pumbedita serving as authoritative centers for the Jewish world. The Geonim, heads of these academies, responded to legal queries from distant communities, maintaining Jewish legal unity across continents. Their responses, preserved in responsa literature, addressed new situations, while grounding decisions in Talmudic precedent. This period proved that Judaism could thrive under non-Jewish rule that respected religious autonomy. The Islamic Golden Age, 850 to 1150 CE, brought unprecedented Jewish cultural achievement. In Muslim Spain, Jews served as viziers, physicians, and merchants, while creating sublime Hebrew poetry and philosophy. Judah Halevi's poetry expressed both love of Zion and philosophical sophistication. He wrote of divine love in Arabic meters while yearning for Jerusalem. Solomon ibn Gabirol's Neoplatonic philosophy influenced both Christian and Islamic thought. Moses Maimonides, the era's towering figure, synthesized Aristotelian philosophy with Jewish law in his Guide for the Perplexed, while his Mishneh Torah provided a systematic legal code. His 13 Principles of Faith attempted to define Jewish belief systematically. When asked how he accomplished so much, He reportedly said, "I never walked 4 cubits without thinking about Torah." This synthesis of revelation and reason would profoundly influence all subsequent Jewish thought. Christian Europe presented a starkly different reality. The Crusades, beginning in 1096, brought massacres of Rhineland Jewish communities, establishing patterns of violence that would recur throughout the medieval period. Crusaders asked why they should travel to fight infidels in the Holy Land, when infidels lived among them. Jews faced increasing restrictions, forced to wear distinctive yellow badges, excluded from guilds and land ownership, confined to money lending, forbidden to Christians. The Fourth Lateran Council, 1215, mandated Jewish segregation. Blood libels, false accusations of ritual murder, sparked pogroms. The Talmud was burned in Paris, 1242, after disputations where Jews were forced to defend their faith in rigged trials. These persecutions produced a culture of martyrdom, commemorated in liturgical poetry, that still brings tears. Despite persecution, medieval European Jews developed rich intellectual traditions. The French rabbi Rashi, 1040 to 1105, produced commentaries on Bible and Talmud so clear and comprehensive they remain standard texts. It's said that without Rashi, the Talmud would be a closed book. His grandsons, the Tosafists, developed complex analytical methods that extended Talmudic discussions. In Germany, the Hasidei Ashkenaz, German pietists, emphasized ethical rigor, mystical prayer, and martyrdom preparation. Jewish communities developed sophisticated self-governance systems. Rabbinical courts handled internal disputes. Communal boards managed taxation and charity. This autonomy within hostile societies strengthened Jewish solidarity. They knew they had only each other. The medieval period also saw Kabbalah's emergence as a major Jewish mystical tradition. Building on earlier mystical speculations, Spanish Kabbalists developed elaborate theories about divine emanations, sephirot, cosmic repair, tikkun, and the soul's journey. The Zohar, attributed to the 2nd century Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai, but likely composed by Moses de Leon in 13th century Spain, became Kabbalah's central text. Its symbolic interpretations of Torah and mystical practices offered alternative approaches to divine encounter. Kabbalah provided spiritual resources for understanding suffering, teaching that Jewish exile reflected cosmic rupture, that human actions could help heal. The era concluded with massive expulsions. England, 1290, France, 1394, and most devastatingly, Spain, 1492. The Spanish expulsion ended centuries of Jewish presence on the very day Columbus sailed for the New World. Jews faced an impossible choice: conversion or exile. Many conversos, forced converts, secretly maintained Jewish practices, risking the Inquisition's tortures. Others fled to the Ottoman Empire, the Netherlands, or North Africa, carrying Sephardic traditions that would enrich Jewish diversity. The medieval era thus demonstrated Jewish resilience amid extremes, from cultural brilliance to brutal persecution. It produced intellectual and spiritual resources that would sustain Judaism through modernity, while revealing the precariousness of Jewish existence in societies where they remained perpetual outsiders. Yet, they survived, their books and beliefs intact, ready for history's next chapter. The early modern era, extending from 1500 to 1750, marked a transitional period in Jewish history. Communities adapted to new realities following medieval expulsions, while encountering Renaissance humanism, the Protestant Reformation, and early Enlightenment ideas. This era witnessed the rise of new Jewish centers, mystical movements responding to trauma, and the gradual emergence of conditions that would enable Jewish entry into modern European society. From Safed's mystical creativity to Amsterdam's commercial prosperity, Jews navigated between tradition and change, creating new forms of Jewish expression that would bridge medieval and modern worlds. The Ottoman Empire emerged as an unexpected haven for expelled Jews, particularly from Spain and Portugal. Sultan Bayezid II welcomed Sephardic refugees, reportedly saying,
"You call Ferdinand a wise king, who impoverishes his country and enriches mine?"
Constantinople, Salonika, and other Ottoman cities developed thriving Jewish communities where Ladino, Judeo-Spanish, culture flourished. The Ottoman millet system granted Jews communal autonomy, allowing religious law to govern internal affairs. Joseph Nasi, a Portuguese converso who returned to Judaism, became a powerful Ottoman diplomat, even attempting to resettle Tiberias. This Ottoman tolerance contrasted sharply with Christian Europe's continued hostility and proved that Jews could prosper under Islamic rule. Safed in Galilee became the era's spiritual center, attracting mystics who transformed Kabbalah from esoteric speculation to practical spirituality. Isaac Luria's teachings explained exile and redemption through cosmic mythology. Divine self-contraction, tzimtzum, created space for creation. Broken vessels, shevirat hakelim, scattered divine sparks throughout reality. And humans must gather those sparks through ritual and ethical action, tikkun olam. This gave every Jew cosmic responsibility. Each mitzvah helped repair the universe. Lurianic Kabbalah provided meaning for historical suffering, while empowering individuals as partners in cosmic redemption. Joseph Caro, Safed's legal authority, combined mystical experience with systematic law in his Shulchan Aruch, the definitive Jewish legal code. He claimed a heavenly Maggid, a spiritual guide, instructed him, showing that law and mysticism could unite. Poland-Lithuania emerged as the new Ashkenazi center, housing the world's largest Jewish population by 1650. The Polish nobility welcomed Jews for economic development, granting unprecedented autonomy.
Yeshivot, Talmudic academies, flourished, developing the analytical method of pilpul, intricate, logical distinctions that sharpened minds, even as they sometimes obscured practical meaning. This period produced a confident, learned Jewish culture, expressed in Yiddish literature, folk customs, and communal institutions, defining Eastern European Jewry. The Protestant Reformation indirectly affected Jews through renewed Christian interest in Hebrew scripture and apocalyptic speculation. Some Protestants believed Jewish conversion was necessary for Christ's return, leading to missionary efforts, but also philosophical engagement. The devastation of the wars of religion made religious tolerance a practical necessity in some regions. Holland's independence brought remarkable Jewish freedom in Amsterdam, where former conversos established a prosperous community. The Portuguese synagogue's grandeur symbolized newfound dignity. Spinoza's emergence from this community and his later excommunication for radical philosophy, denying traditional concepts of God and revelation, demonstrated both the opportunities and the limits of Jewish intellectual engagement with broader culture. The Sabbatean movement revealed early modern Jewry's spiritual volatility. Shabbatai Zevi's messianic claim in 1665–66 sparked unprecedented enthusiasm across the Jewish world. His knowledge of Kabbalah, charismatic personality, and Nathan of Gaza's prophetic support convinced many that redemption was imminent. Communities sold possessions, preparing for ingathering to the Holy Land. Jews who had hidden their identity for generations revealed themselves. But when Shabbatai converted to Islam under Ottoman pressure, devastation was complete. Some interpreted the apostasy as mystical necessity, the Messiah descending into evil to redeem sparks. The movement's failure discredited public messianism and reinforced rabbinic authority, though Sabbatean ideas continued underground, teaching Jews to be wary of false hopes. The era's conclusion saw gradual changes anticipating modernity. Court Jews in German states leveraged financial services into political influence, though their position remained precarious, useful to princes, but hated by the public. The Enlightenment's emphasis on reason and natural rights raised new questions about Jews' place in European society. Moses Mendelssohn emerged as the exemplar of an enlightened Jew, maintaining orthodox practice while engaging German philosophy. His Jerusalem argued for religious tolerance and Jewish civic rights, proposing that Jews could be loyal citizens while maintaining their faith.
The modern era. The modern era, spanning from 1750 to the present, has witnessed the most dramatic transformations in Jewish history since the Temple's destruction. This period encompasses emancipation and integration, devastating persecution and genocide, national rebirth, and religious innovation. From ghetto walls falling to the establishment of Israel, from the Holocaust's darkness to contemporary Jewish diversity. Modern Jews have navigated between tradition and change, particularism and universalism, confronting challenges and opportunities unprecedented in their 4,000-year history. The story reaches its climax not with an ending, but with new beginnings. The Enlightenment and Jewish emancipation began transforming European Jewish life in the late 18th century. The French Revolution's Declaration of the Rights of Man theoretically included Jews, though Napoleon's Assembly of Jewish Notables in 1806 demanded they prove compatibility between Jewish law and French citizenship. To the Jews as individuals, everything. To the Jews as a nation, nothing, declared one revolutionary. German states gradually granted civil rights throughout the 19th century, though social acceptance lagged. The Haskalah, the Jewish Enlightenment, promoted secular education, European languages, and cultural integration. Moses Mendelssohn pioneered this synthesis, translating the Bible into German and arguing for religious tolerance. Maskilim, enlighteners, established modern schools, newspapers, and literature, creating new forms of Jewish cultural expression, while others warned integration could mean disappearance. This integration prompted religious innovation. Reform Judaism emerged in Germany, introducing vernacular prayers, organs, and shortened services, emphasizing ethical monotheism over ritual law. Conservative Judaism developed as a middle path, accepting historical change while maintaining Hebrew worship and core observances. Orthodox Judaism responded by articulating traditional positions more systematically. Samson Raphael Hirsch's Torah with secular culture approach demonstrated modern Orthodox possibilities. These movements reflected deeper questions. Could Jews be full citizens while maintaining distinctiveness? What parts of tradition are essential? The debates continue today. Eastern Europe followed a different path. The Russian Empire, home to 5 million Jews, confined them to the Pale of Settlement and imposed harsh quotas and restrictions. Pogroms, especially after Alexander II's assassination in 1881 and the Kishinev massacre in 1903, shattered illusions of gradual progress. Yet out of this pressure came cultural flowering. Yiddish literature reached artistic heights, with writers like Sholem Aleichem and I.L. Peretz. Hasidism spread ecstatic spirituality to the common people, while opponents, the Mitnagdim, emphasized rigorous Talmudic study. Socialist movements promised universal redemption. The Bund, a secular Jewish labor movement, advocated cultural autonomy rooted in the here and now, Doikite, rather than distant dreams. Zionism arose from the dual forces of European nationalism and persistent anti-Semitism. Theodor Herzl, shocked by Parisian mobs shouting "Death to the Jews" during the Dreyfus Affair, organized political Zionism, seeking international recognition for a Jewish state. "If you will it, it is no dream," he declared. Earlier pioneers, the Lovers of Zion, had already begun settling the land of Israel. The Balfour Declaration in 1917 endorsed a Jewish homeland, though British mandate policies often restricted immigration. Despite Arab opposition and internal Jewish debates, the Yishuv, the Jewish settlement, built schools, farms, and defense organizations, creating facts on the ground, while diplomats argued in foreign capitals. Then came the Holocaust, humanity's darkest hour. Nazi Germany systematically murdered 6 million Jews, 1/3 of the world's Jewish population. The Shoah destroyed thousand-year-old communities and erased the heart of Eastern European Jewish civilization. Yet even amid dehumanization, Jews preserved their humanity through spiritual resistance, cultural activities, and documentation. In the Warsaw Ghetto, they performed symphonies. In the camps, they shared bread and whispered prayers. The Holocaust raised agonizing theological questions. Where was God? Where was man? Post-war revelations of Allied indifference and widespread collaboration intensified Jewish resolve. Never again would Jews depend on others' goodwill for survival. In 1948, the State of Israel was born, fulfilling 2 millennia of prayer and longing, but also raising new realities and dilemmas. Holocaust survivors and refugees from Arab lands joined idealistic pioneers to build a modern state. Israel's military victories, technological innovation, and vibrant democracy demonstrated Jewish sovereignty in action. It now has more Nobel laureates per capita than any other nation. But the occupation following the 1967 Six-Day War introduced ongoing moral and political challenges. Today, Judaism is more diverse than ever. American Jews, comprising just 2% of the population, account for 33% of its Nobel laureates. But they also debate assimilation, continuity, and identity. Feminism transformed Jewish practice. Women claimed equal participation. LGBTQ Jews demanded recognition and inclusion. Jews of color challenged Ashkenazi assumptions. Intermarriage sparked new conversations about who belongs. Yet Jewish learning flourished through day schools, online platforms, adult education, and spiritual renewal. The modern era is a paradox. More freedom and prosperity than ever before, but also more questions about meaning, memory, and belonging. Still, the covenant continues. The same tradition that began with Abraham's lonely stand for monotheism now includes Israeli soldiers and American senators, Orthodox mystics and secular humanists, all part of an ongoing story that refuses to end. From a small tribe challenging the gods of antiquity to a global people who gave the world ethical monotheism, the Jewish story defies every historical pattern. They survived when Egypt, Assyria, Babylonia, Greece, and Rome all fell. They maintained their identity through 2,000 years of exile. When other dispersed peoples disappeared, they returned to their homeland and revived their ancient language when history said both were impossible. Today, in synagogues from São Paulo to Seoul, in startups in Silicon Valley, and study halls in Jerusalem, the conversation that began with Abraham continues. Their survival isn't just historical, it's a testament to the power of ideas, community, and faith to outlast empires. This story isn't just about the past, it's about the future we're all still writing. Thank you for joining me on this incredible journey through Jewish history. If you found this video meaningful, please like and share it with others who might appreciate this story. Comment below with what surprised you most, or what questions you still have. And subscribe to see more deep dives into the histories, ideas, and stories that shaped our world. Until next time, keep questioning, keep learning.